The most dangerous thing about a well-laid trap is how much it looks like a family dinner. I remember the smell of my mother's roasted garlic bread, that warm, familiar pull that meant Sunday. The sound of my father's chair scraping across the tile when he sat down with that particular brand of ceremony he reserved for important moments. The clink of wine glasses, the way Camille kept glancing at her phone under the table, not because she was distracted, but because she was nervous. I noticed. I always noticed. My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm 34 years old. I own a hotel called the Meridian, a 4-star boutique property in the West Side Arts District that I built from a $40,000 inheritance my grandmother left specifically, legally, and in writing to me, not to the family, to me. 7 years. That's how long I poured myself into that building. 7 years of 16-hour days, of contractor disputes and permit nightmares, and one catastrophic burst pipe that cost me everything I'd saved in year 3. 7 years of building something real out of something broken. On that Sunday evening, my parents sat across from me with a manila folder, a family attorney named Gerald Fitch, and the kind of smiles that people wear when they've already decided the outcome of a conversation. My father pushed the folder toward me like it was a gift. "We had Gerald draft something up," he said. "Just a restructuring. Good for everyone." Inside was a 12-page document, notarized. The summary on page 1 said that my sister Camille would assume operational management of the Meridian Boutique Hotel and receive 30% of net profits effective the following quarter. I set the document down. I picked up my fork. I took one bite of the garlic bread. Then I reached into the briefcase I had carried to that dinner, the one my family had assumed was full of paperwork I brought everywhere out of habit, and I slid a single page across the mahogany. Just one page. My father picked it up. He read the first paragraph. I watched the color drain from his face, the way water drains from a bathtub, slow at first, then suddenly all at once. Gerald leaned in. He read it too. He set his pen down and did not pick it up again. The garlic bread went cold. The room went quiet. And I thought about my grandmother, about what she understood that my family never did, that a document is only as powerful as the person who prepared for it. I had been preparing for 2 years. They had been assuming for 34. Before we dive into how I set myself free, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this story. And I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your city below in the comments. Now let me take you back to where it all truly began. My grandmother's name was Rosa. She came to this country at 22 with a suitcase and a 10-word vocabulary. She cleaned hotel rooms for 17 years. She never once complained about it, because she said that every room she walked into was a room someone had trusted her with, and that trust, she believed, was sacred. She used to take me to work with her when I was small, not because she had no childcare, but because she wanted me to see something. She'd fold a towel and place it at the foot of the bed and say, "Mija, a person who makes a bed for a stranger understands more about dignity than most people learn in a lifetime." I was 7. I didn't fully understand, but the image stayed with me. Her hands moving with absolute certainty, her face calm, her work invisible to the guest but perfect in its precision. She died when I was 26. She left me $40,000 and a handwritten note that said, "Build something that lasts." My parents loved me. I want to be clear about that because this story is complicated, and love is not the same as loyalty, and loyalty is not the same as respect. They loved me in the way that large, loud families often love their children, with a kind of swallowing warmth that has no edges, with pride that was genuine but possessive, with support that arrived on their terms. My father, Richard, is a retired contractor. He's a self-made man in the way that self-made men often are, convinced that his story is the template for everyone else's. He worked hard, he built things. He expected that the things people built around him were, in some ancestral sense, also his. My mother, Sandra, is the kind of woman who can deliver a devastating ultimatum while refilling your water glass. She never raises her voice. She never has to. She operates in the register of quiet expectation, a hum beneath every conversation that says, "This is what we're doing, and you're going to agree, and we're all going to smile about it." And Camille, my sister. Camille is 3 years younger than me and has always moved through life with the particular ease of someone who has never been required to earn anything, not by circumstance, but by habit, by family pattern. She is charming and funny and genuinely likable in rooms full of strangers. In rooms full of family, she is the person who has never been told no. I loved her. I want to say that plainly. For the first 3 years of building the Meridian, I brought Camille in on everything. I gave her a title, Guest Experience Director. That was real, with real responsibility. I paid her a real salary. She lasted 14 months. She left because she said the commute was exhausting, the hours were unpredictable, she had other opportunities she wanted to explore. I didn't fight it. I thanked her for her time, shook her hand like a colleague, and spent the next weekend hiring someone who wanted to be there. Here is the memory I keep returning to when I try to locate the moment I should have known. It was about 2 years after the Meridian opened. We were having a family birthday dinner, my father's 62nd. The hotel had just been featured in a regional travel magazine, not a major outlet but meaningful, a full-page photo, a glowing review. My father held the magazine at the head of the table and said, "You know, when I helped her get the permits for that place, I told her exactly how to talk to the zoning board. That's why it got through." He had not helped me get permits. He had once sent me a name of a guy he knew, a guy who, when I called, had retired 2 years prior and had no idea who my father was. But everyone at the table nodded, and I smiled, and I let it go. I let it go because it seemed small, because correcting him in front of everyone felt cruel, because I thought, he's proud, and pride sometimes rewrites the story a little, and that's human, and I love him. I understand now that what I was actually doing was practicing a kind of silence that would cost me later. I was teaching everyone at that table, including myself, that my story was available for revision. The shift didn't arrive in one dramatic moment. It never does. It arrived the way erosion does, in grains so small you keep telling yourself the cliff is still intact, right up until the edge gives way. Year 5 of the Meridian was the year the money became undeniable. We had achieved 4-star recognition. We were consistently at 87% occupancy. We had a waiting list for event bookings. I had hired a full management team and was beginning to draw a real salary for the first time since I'd broken ground. The family noticed. The first sign was a conversation my mother and I had over coffee. She mentioned, casually, the way she mentions everything that matters, that Camille was in between jobs again. "She's so talented," my mother said. "It's just that no one ever gives her the right opportunity." I nodded. I said I hoped she found something good. "Well," my mother said, refilling my cup, "she always did do so well when she worked with you." I looked up. My mother was already talking about something else, but the sentence sat in my chest like a stone. Over the next few months, the conversations escalated in their subtlety. My father began asking more pointed questions about the hotel's finances, not out of genuine curiosity, but with the implication of entitlement. Questions like, "How much did you net last quarter? What are you doing with the profit? Have you thought about expansion? If you brought in a partner, you could really grow. Partner always meant Camille. I started to dread family dinners, not because of any single conversation, but because of the cumulative weight of them, the way each meal felt like a negotiation I hadn't agreed to enter. I remember one evening, late spring, the hotel's 5th anniversary, when Camille herself raised it directly. We were standing in my parents' kitchen, and she said it the way she says most things, lightly, almost cheerfully, as if the observation were someone else's. I was thinking about what I could bring to the Meridian if I came back, like really came back, in a leadership capacity. I took a breath. Camille, I said, you left, and honestly, you left at a really difficult time for me. I don't think— Oh, I know. I'm not saying it's guaranteed. I'm just saying Dad thinks it makes sense. Mom thinks so too. There it was. The family consensus had already been reached. I was the last to be informed. I said I'd think about it. I did not think about it. What I did instead was call my attorney, a woman named Patricia Osai, who I'd worked with since the hotel's founding. I told her what was happening. She listened carefully and then asked a question I'll never forget. Elena, do your founding documents protect you if a third party, including a family member, were to try to assert management rights or claim profit sharing through a separate agreement? I pulled out the binder. I read through it. They didn't. Patricia said, "Let's fix that." We spent 6 weeks drafting Clause 4.5, a shareholder and founder protection provision that invalidated any restructuring agreement, profit-sharing arrangement, or management reassignment that was not originated within the hotel's founding governance structure. It required the written consent of the founding sole member, me, and made any external agreement attempting to circumvent that structure legally void. I signed it on a Tuesday morning in Patricia's office while it rained outside. I told no one. I used to believe silence was safety. Now I know it was strategy. The Sunday dinner was my mother's idea. I know this because she called me 4 days prior with a specific kind of warmth that functions as camouflage, the voice she uses when she's already decided something and wants your presence, not your opinion. "Just a family dinner, Elena. Dad wants to see you. Bring the good wine." I almost didn't bring the briefcase. I want to be transparent about that. I almost left it in my car. It felt paranoid to carry it to a meal. It felt like I was bringing a weapon to a dinner table. But I thought about my grandmother folding towels, about the guests who trusted her with their rooms, about how she prepared for every shift with the same quiet precision, regardless of whether the room was simple or complicated. I brought the briefcase. I arrived at 6:15. Gerald Fitch was already there, which told me everything. Family attorneys do not attend Sunday dinners unless they've been invited well in advance. He was a compact man in a gray suit with a practiced smile that said he'd been in rooms like this many times and had learned to keep his face neutral regardless of outcome. My father shook my hand at the door. He always shook my hand, never hugged me, which I had accepted long ago as his particular grammar of affection. My mother kissed my cheek and took the wine. Camille was sitting at the far end of the table with her hands in her lap, and she looked at me with an expression I will spend years trying to fully decode, somewhere between guilt and something that looked, painfully, like hope. We ate for 20 minutes before my father placed the folder on the table. He didn't slide it to me. He placed it in the center, the way you placed an artifact, not a document, something to be contemplated, not questioned. "We've been thinking a lot about the family's future," he began, "about legacy, about making sure what you've built doesn't just benefit one person, but becomes something we all share." Sandra nodded. Gerald kept his hands folded. Gerald put together something that outlines how we move forward. Camille steps into an operational role, 30% of net profits, which is fair given the family support that's gone into this property over the years. I looked at him for a long moment. Family support was how my father described the following: one phone call to a retired contact, two unsolicited opinions about my lobby's paint color, and a single afternoon when he drove me to look at a property I ultimately didn't purchase. My mother added, in her gentle disaster way, "We just think Camille deserves a real chance, Elena. You've always had so much. It would mean so much to her, to all of us." And there it was, stripped to its architecture. I had built something from nothing, and the argument for taking a portion of it away from me was that I had too much. I set my fork down. I did it slowly because I knew that whatever happened in the next 60 seconds would be the thing I replayed for years, and I wanted my hands to be steady. I reached into the briefcase. I removed one page. I placed it in the center of the Gerald folder. "That's Clause 4.5 of the Meridian's founding governance documents," I said. "You'll want to read paragraph 2. My father picked it up. Gerald leaned in. Camille craned her neck from the far end of the table. Paragraph 2 of Clause 4.5 stated in plain language that any agreement purporting to assign management authority or profit rights to a third party without origination from the founding governance structure was unenforceable. It had been drafted, notarized, and filed with the state over 2 years prior. Gerald read it twice. I watched him do it. Then he set the paper down, pressed his fingertips together, and said, carefully, professionally, with the controlled tone of a man recalibrating in real time, "Mr. Vasquez, I wasn't provided this document when I drafted the agreement. This significantly changes the picture." My father's face did not crumple. It froze, like a screen that has lost its signal, still showing the last image, but clearly no longer connected to anything. My mother set down her glass. Camille looked at the table. I picked up my fork. I finished my meal. The garlic bread was cold by then. I ate it anyway. No one spoke for what felt like a full minute. That minute belonged to me. I had paid for it in 2 years of silence, and I intended to spend every second of it. I'm going to pause here for a second. If this story is resonating with you, or if you've ever felt the pain of being misunderstood by the people who are supposed to love you most, please like this video and subscribe. It really lets me know that sharing these hard stories is worth it. Gerald Fitch packed his briefcase and left shortly after 9. He shook my hand on the way out, not out of respect for what I'd done, but out of the professional recognition that I had been the most prepared person in the room, and that in the law, preparation is the only currency that matters. My father did not speak to me again that evening. He stood up from the table, walked to the living room, and turned on the television. Not because there was something he wanted to watch, because he needed something to look at that wasn't me. My mother followed me to the door when I left. She stood on the porch in the dark and said, quietly, "You could have just talked to us, Elena. You didn't have to do it like this." I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. Months. I turned it over in my mind the way you worry a loose tooth, not because it hurts in a new way each time, but because you need to map the exact location of the pain. What she was saying, I eventually understood, was, "You could have given us what we wanted and let us feel good about the asking." What I heard, through all that training in her particular language, was, "Your refusal humiliated us, and we are going to hold that." They held it. For 3 months, there was near total silence. No Sunday dinners, no check-in calls. Camille texted me once about 6 weeks after the dinner, a message that said only, "I want you to know I didn't know about the attorney until that night." I read it several times. I believed her. I also understood that believing her and absolving the situation were 2 completely different things. The family fracturing was, in its own way, a kind of grief. Not because I had lost people, they were still there, still alive, still capable of repair, but because I had lost a particular story I'd been telling myself. The story that said, "They will always ultimately want what's best for you." I had replaced that story, quietly, with something more accurate. They want what's best for the version of you that serves what's best for them, and those are not the same thing. The staff at the Meridian noticed I was quieter than usual. My general manager, a meticulous woman named Diana, who had been with me since year 2, brought me tea one afternoon and sat across from my desk and said, "You don't have to tell me anything, but you look like someone who needs to hear that this place runs because of you, and everyone who works here knows it." I didn't cry in her office. I cried in my car afterward, in the parking structure, for about 4 minutes. Then I went back upstairs and approved the Q4 staffing plan. Small victories accumulated slowly. The first was purely practical. Patricia confirmed that Gerald's restructuring agreement had drafted was, as she put it, an elegant document for a situation that did not legally exist. There was no legal action my family could take. Clause 4.5 had closed every door. The second was subtler. About 2 months after the dinner, I was reviewing the hotel's guest book, something I do quarterly, reading actual handwritten entries from guests, a habit I started in year 1 to stay connected to why I built the place. And I found a note from a woman who had stayed with us for her 40th birthday. She wrote, "This hotel feels like it was made by someone who actually cares. You can feel it in every detail. Whatever she went through to build this, it was worth it." I don't know how she knew the owner was a she. I don't know what made her write those words, but I taped that note to the inside of my desk drawer, and it is still there. Validation rarely arrives in the form you expected, from the people you hoped would offer it. It arrives sideways, from strangers, from the work itself. You have to be paying attention.
I started therapy in January. Not because of the dinner, that was December, but because of what I found in myself in the weeks after it. A particular kind of exhaustion that sleep didn't touch. A tendency to replay not just the dinner itself, but every moment in my life I could now trace backward to the same root. The habit of shrinking what I knew to be true in order to make someone else more comfortable. My therapist, Dr. Okafor, is a quiet man with a precise way of asking questions that makes you feel like the answer was always there and you simply hadn't been given permission to say it aloud. In our second session, he asked, "When did you first learn that it was your job to manage other people's feelings about your success?" I sat with that question for a long time. I thought about the dinner, about the magazine, about my father saying, "I helped her get the permits," and everyone nodding, and me smiling and taking a bite of my food. "I think I learned it early," I said. "I think I learned it at every table." Healing, I discovered, is not a single event. It is not the moment you slide clause 4.5 across a table. That moment was justice, which is different. Justice is external. Healing is internal. Healing is what you do after justice, when the adrenaline is gone and you're still in the same body, still in the same family, still responsible for getting up every morning and being a person. I started walking in the mornings, not as exercise exactly, but as deliberate time to exist without being needed. Just 40 minutes before the hotel opened, before my phone became an active thing. I'd walk along the waterfront near the Meridian and watch the way the light came up over the water and think about my grandmother, who cleaned rooms for 17 years and never once let the invisibility of that work make her feel invisible. She had known something I was only beginning to understand, that the value of what you build is not determined by whether the people closest to you are willing to acknowledge it. I also started keeping a journal, not of the betrayal, but of the hotel. Specific moments. The morning a chef I'd hired sent me a handwritten recipe card for the dish he was putting on the spring menu because he wanted me to have a copy. The afternoon, a longtime guest asked if she could hold her daughter's rehearsal dinner in our courtyard because she said it was the most beautiful room she'd ever been in. I had built the most beautiful room she'd ever been in, with $40,000 and 7 years and every ounce of capacity I possessed. I let myself feel that without immediately following it with a caveat. That, for me, was radical. My relationship with my family began to slowly, imperfectly reconstitute itself. My mother called in March, 4 months after the dinner. We spoke for 40 minutes about nothing important, her garden, the neighborhood, a television series she'd been watching. At the very end, she said, "I know it wasn't fair what we tried to do. I don't fully understand why it felt right to me at the time, but it wasn't fair." It was not an apology. It was something closer to an acknowledgement, which from Sandra Vasquez I understood to be the hardest thing she knew how to offer. "I know. I love you." I meant both things. My father took longer. He called in May. He said he'd been thinking. He did not say what about. He asked if I wanted to come see a property he was thinking about renovating. I went. We walked through a dusty, beautiful old building, and he talked about load-bearing walls, and I talked about natural light, and neither of us mentioned December, and something that had been rigid between us softened a few degrees. It will take more time. Some things between us may never fully repair. That is not a tragedy. That is the specific grief of loving complicated people. Camille and I had dinner in June, just the two of us. She told me she had gotten a job at a property management firm, something she'd found on her own without family intervention, and that she was proud of herself for that. I told her she should be. She asked, "Did you always know you were going to protect yourself that way?" I knew someone was going to try something, I just didn't know when. She nodded slowly. Grandma would have done the same thing. Yes, she would have. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean forgiving on someone else's timeline. It means finding out who you are when you're not managing everyone else's relationship with your story and deciding that person is worth protecting.
I think about Clause 4.5 a lot. Not with pride, exactly, though there is some of that, and I've stopped apologizing for it. I think about it the way I think about any well-made thing, with a kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing the work was done carefully, at the right time, for the right reasons. I didn't insert that clause out of anger. I inserted it because I was paying attention, because I understood that the people who love you and the people who protect you are not always the same people. And sometimes the only person available to perform both functions is you. My grandmother built her life in other people's rooms. She found dignity in that work, not despite its invisibility, but somehow through it. She saved money for decades and left it to me with instructions so clear they could not be misread. Build something that lasts. I built something that lasts. And when the people I love tried to take a portion of it without asking, wrapped in the language of family and fairness and legacy, I was ready. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I respected what I'd built enough to protect it. Here is what I want to say to anyone sitting with a version of this story, anyone who has ever smiled through the rewriting of their own history at a dinner table, who has swallowed the correction, who has practiced the silence. You are allowed to protect your work. You are allowed to protect your story. You are allowed to prepare, quietly, with full legal specificity, for the possibility that the people who say they want the best for you might one day define best as theirs. You are allowed to sit at that table, eat the garlic bread, and wait. The Meridian is still standing. We had our best occupancy year on record. Diana was promoted to Director of Operations. The Courtyard hosted 14 events this spring alone. I still walk in the mornings. I still read the guest book. I still tape notes to the inside of my desk drawer, small dispatches from strangers who somehow felt what I put into the walls of that place. Last week, a guest checked out and left a note at the front desk. It said, "Thank you for building this. You can feel the love in it." You can feel the love in it. Yes, after everything, still. She didn't argue with their ambition. She'd already outwritten it. This was another story from Revenge Room, where we turn pain into purpose and betrayal into balance. If this Elena story moved you, please don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next transformation. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you? How did you rebuild trust? What's one thing you learned about yourself after a betrayal? Share one moment in your healing journey that changed everything. Let's discuss in the comments. And until our next story, remember, you can reclaim your own narrative, and you're not alone.